fact that Torah reading, as we know it, which is on Monday mornings, Thursday mornings, Saturday mornings, and then Saturday afternoons, was enacted by Ezra and the men of the Great Assembly. This is what we're discussing, the things they added. Let's read this again, just so we make sure that we have it down. And really, this ties into the over-fantasizing about the world that was. Just recently, someone was talking to me about how it used to be in the olden days, and in the olden days, people lived till 30. In the olden days, there are a lot of things that weren't so beautiful about the olden days. You don't have to hate on everything that exists today just because it's different than it was before. I'm certain, yesterday, my kids wanted to watch something on the iPad. And so...
Shabbat?
Yesterday, Sunday.
Oh my God.
And so, Sunday's their day they can watch something. They always want to watch one thing on a Sunday. So, they have all these shows for kids, like Peppa Pig and Paw Patrol.
Oh, it's good.
I said, just a nostalgia. I said, are any of the old shows I grew up watching still around? So I put on Mr. Rogers. Remember Mr. Rogers?
Oh, he's so nice.
Polly doesn't seem to like Mr. Rogers.
I love him. They just had a film about him.
Yeah, they did have a film about him.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
That's
He's
right.
terrific.
So I thought, what would happen to my children if they watched Mr. Rogers? First off, my children.
Did they like him?
Yeah, that's right. They liked him. They liked his song. I like songs. So there are a lot of, you're my friend. Very emotional. But what you notice is things are not as fast-paced. Things are very slow.
Yeah, much slower.
Everything is educational. So there's little, no bam, rah, nothing's going on that's too crazy. The graphics are horrendous compared to what the kids are looking at today. I mean, the kids can pretty much look at the screen today and see. But my wife was listening to it and said, that's incredible. The graphics are terrible. Even the acting sometimes is a little bit scripted. But the fact that there's a TV show that had some valuable information inside of it, that's a pretty big deal. I think a lot of kids watch TV today, and if they were watching TV and there were values that were being shared over there, that would be a wonderful thing.
I'm always watch with my granddaughters, and I'm telling you, there is Dora, there is Peppa Pig, and there is another one, and you know what? They do teach the kids how to be polite, what to do, and also it's educational, like numbers, like stuff up, down, and gravity. I was shocked.
And I'm happy to hear that.
Thomas. We watched Thomas with we used to when the kids were young with the boys.
Thomas the Train. Thomas the Train.
God, I'm sick of that train. He's cute. He is cute.
And the truth is that sometimes we complain that in the olden days it was better, but when I was watching Mr. Rogers, there was content there that I appreciated. I don't see today. But I completely understand why a generation that is not used to the graphics are bad. Some of the colors are off. Every generation, you have to understand what your generation is dealing with. Your generation, what it has, what it needs. I was talking to someone in the mental health field, who was saying that in today's world, people have an attention span of 3 or 4 seconds. It doesn't come from
our generation too?
I don't know about your generation.
Not so much.
A generation that grew up watching things on video clips. What are clips? Clips are not even 10 minutes long. They're 3 minutes long. They're 1.5 minutes long. They're 45 seconds long. They say if you don't catch someone's attention in the first 3 or 4 seconds, they don't finish watching the clip. There are people who learn a lot, but they don't learn from reading anymore. They're learning from watching things, and that has changed the way people receive information.
So the purpose of meditation is not just to quiet your mind. That's
concentration.
Yes. So when you practice meditation, the ultimate goal is when you tell your mind we're focusing, your mind focuses.
I think
You're
people have a hard
training
time
your
focusing
mind.
nowadays.
Well, that's it.
I think that's true.
That's
right.
it. You've got to have some quiet time. And there are a lot of schools, sometimes in these alternative schools with the kids, at least our grandkids went to these types of schools, where the kids arrived in the morning, they had to sit in a circle silently, and then pick up the drumstick or whatever it was that was going to be. So they were talking, and then they could say what they wanted to say, put it down, and then the teacher called on somebody else, and everyone had to be quiet and listen.
They have a chance.
And after that, they started their classroom stuff. It was a training.
So this is something, when I was in yeshiva, there were rabbis that would yell about the fact that people brought and used their synagogues, their phones at synagogue. I mean, using it, you see people that right after they finish their silent services, they're right on their phone checking their WhatsApp, their Facebook. Now, is there anything legally incorrect about using a phone in the synagogue? You can argue yes or no. What he was arguing was people used to have that hour a day where they were just present with people, with their prayers, with their time. And now what happens in between every paragraph, you're checking your text messages. You're not present, not on your phone, and you're not present in the room that you're in. And really, it's the one last refuge where you can focus on something. And people are getting rid of that also. That's a very scary thing to see.
Why don't,
Sure
like
it is.
corporations, when you go into a meeting, everyone
Yeah.
takes their cell phone, puts it into a box,
Good.
and then you go into the meeting. And you
And-
pick up your cell phone when you leave.
But
Why
Paula,
don't-
you
why
also
doesn't
go
a
to
yeshiva do
corporations
that?
where people are in meetings and everyone's on their
And
phone.
they're
Everyone's on their
doing
phone.
everything from the phone.
Now,
But
you
that's the
Oh.
culture of the corporation that allows that.
That's right.
So the synagogue, the yeshiva
So the
could
yeshivas
set a rule
don't
that's-
allow. They don't allow cell phones,
Yeah.
and they weren't complaining
Also
about.
at school.
They weren't complaining about the students. They were complaining about like people, that adults, that became parents of the children. You know, you come in and you are. I've had to make an effort. Listen, I'm from a generation that everyone uses their phones. I had to make an effort. When I go to the park with my kids, I don't take out my phone.
Good.
I want my kids to know that when they're at the park, I'm with them in the park. It's a
Good.
difficult thing. You know, when people call me and I'm not answering the phone, they don't know that I'm at the park not answering their phone. They just think I'm not answering their phone. I try very often for the 2 hours between when my kids come home and they start getting ready for bed that I should be home and present with them. I try not to schedule phone calls in that time period. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard because you live in a world where people expect that they can reach you at every hour of the day.
Yeah.
In the olden days, my rabbi still has it. There are 2 hours a day that you can call him. That's only 2 hours he's near his home
Good.
phone. He doesn't have a cell phone. Why?
Right.
Just for the few minutes of my life that I have alone, I want to be alone. When I'm in the car, I don't want people calling me. I want to be able to just sit and that's something that I don't think we have anymore. I don't think you have to force it. I think there are some people that, okay, this is their life. You just deal with them, and you don't have to tell them that their lifestyle is bad. But for me, it really works that my kids should know that they're not fighting for attention over my phone. At the end of the day, and look up from your phone one day, and my kids are 5. You know, they're 18, they're 20, they're going to college already.
Right.
I spent my whole time checking my emails. It's something
have
that you
to-
never want to regret.
You have to do it for yourself.
But it's hard. It takes
There's-
discipline.
There's an idea that the most important gift you can give somebody is being present for them. And if we lose that, we really, really lose a lot. And if you do that for your kids, it'll pay off in spades.
I have a friend who told me, he said one of the things him and his wife had to work with he's younger than me, once they got married was not use, and it might sound funny to some people, not using their cell phone once they go to bed together. Not to fall asleep, both of them independently on their cell phones. It's an interesting thing. It's a thing that could happen, and so the whole dynamic of a bedroom, of sharing a bed was I know this is an important thing,
meal.
and if people are lacking that, then I always tell you Friday night dinner, I'm not giving you reasons logically for why Shabbat exists. But it's a really special thing for me that there's one night a week where everybody gets together for dinner without their phones, without a TV in the background, without the radio on, without music playing. It's just everybody sitting together as a family at a table. We might be one of the last cultures in this country that does that on a regular basis. We may be the only ones.
Everyone does Shabbat differently, though.
That's right. See?
You
Now
know,
there are people
so
who do Shabbat, and
Some
that's
people
not the
that do
experience
Shabbat,
of
they
Shabbat.
call the kids down for dinner, and then the dinner is over an hour and a half later, and everyone's doing their own thing in their bedroom. So, you know, the way you
Do Shabbat.
do
Good.
Shabbat, and the way maybe Chabad rabbis or more Orthodox rabbis,
All the Shomer
Do
Shabbat. That's the
everyone
same.
does Shabbat differently.
But we never have, on the table, we never have, when we eat, if it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, never. So
Good.
I'm a gangster, like
Yeah,
my mom said.
every family,
No,
Every family is different and has
no two
different dynamics.
families are alike.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
I grew up in a home that when my father or mother came home from work, from wherever they came from, no matter what you were doing, no matter where you were in the house, you stopped doing what you're doing, you come say hello, you give them a hug and a kiss. Until today, when my father comes into a room or my mother comes into a room, you stop, drop, and roll. And that was for me. You greet people, probably before I leave the house. People used to make fun of me in yeshiva. Before I would leave for Shabbat or something, my brother got a hug and a kiss and a hello and a can take care of it. And there was always some kind of personal interaction that happened. But I
Every
think
family is
every
different.
family is different,
You
and
can't assume that every family is like your
I didn't
not.
say that.
family.
I didn't say.
Yeah,
I'm
we are the same.
exactly saying that it's not that way.
Their families
Now, some people would say that that's a terroristic
It's culture.
mentality. Everyone has to
No,
stop
it's
just because you
culture.
came into the house.
Terroristic mentality?
Like Paulette once shared about the au pairs and the privacy versus we're talking about family dinners, and not every culture is different. There's no right or wrong here, but I think it's important at least that a person should be able to say that there's one time in their life or one something in their life that they focus on. That would be a very powerful thing. So reading the Torah, the Talmud recounts the 10 enactments were introduced by Ezra the scribe. Ezra enacted 10 enactments. The Torah be read publicly in the afternoon service on the Sabbath, and the law be read publicly on Monday and Thursday.
Where are you reading, please?
Page 11.
Page 11 in the middle of the page.
Oh, back
I don't know why he actually switches between the word Torah and the word law. They mean the same thing. Torah means law and law means Torah. Ezra's first enactment was the public reading of the Torah. Astonishingly, throughout almost the entire period of the First Temple, there was hardly any study of Torah, even at the most basic level. There are many who love to romanticize this era, claiming that during the first temple period, all the people were suffused with Torah. A frequently quoted passage of this kind appears in Tractate Sanhedrin, praising the generation of King Hezekiah. The yoke of Sancheriv shall be destroyed on account of the oil of Chizkiah, which burned in the synagogues and houses of study. You know, in the olden days, they didn't study in the same place they prayed. There were rooms for prayer, and there were rooms for study. They weren't the same thing. Kind of like if you're familiar with old synagogues, maybe in the East Coast, for example, where synagogues are a little more traditionally built. There's a synagogue, sanctuary. There's a library where people study. There may even be classrooms where classes were given. And then there's like a social hall where you do social events. I can tell you in most synagogues, at least in San Diego that I'm familiar with, a lot of the social events happen inside of the main sanctuary of the synagogue. It could be because they don't have enough money to have a bigger building. It could be that just became the culture, that the synagogue room is a multi-purpose room. But in the olden days, there were places where you prayed and places where you studied, and those were not the same places. He planted what did he do? He planted a sword by the door of the house of study and proclaimed, "Whoever does not study the Torah will be pierced with the sword." Meaning, he decided that education is something that is mandatory. It's not an option. You can't just choose whether you want to educate your children or not. Yesterday was interesting. I was reading an art. We had a discussion here about private schools versus public schools and truant officers. And I went to go look it up. And can a student in a private school be called out by a truant officer? It's a public school system that has a truancy policy. But really, in this country, if you send your children to public school and they don't go a certain amount of days in the year, they're missing from school, that's actually a crime. It's a obligation on the parents, meaning the school systems of today, or the government of today, believes very much that you can compel someone to get an education. At least you can try. You can try. They searched from Dan until Beersheba, and no ignoramus was found from Gabat until Antipatris, nor did they find a single boy, girl, man, woman who was not thoroughly familiar with the laws of purity and impurity. That's okay. Now we mentioned last week. That what was important here was that he mentioned boy, girl, man, woman. That got us to the conversation about women studying Torah, which led us to Mechitzot, everything else. Yet, notwithstanding the greatness of Chizkiah's generation, this was the exception among all the generations of the first temple. You cannot take an exception to a rule and pretend that was the rule everywhere. There's an exception. A more typical situation is described by Ezra, Yirmiyahu, and the other prophets, in which the people were estranged from the Torah. Let's look. Footnote 4. Someone read footnote 4 first?
According to a Talmudic tradition, it was Moshe who enacted the custom of reading the Torah on Shabbat and festivals. But it is doubtful whether this enactment endured during the First Temple period, bearing in mind the total surprise at the discovery of the Torah in the days of King Hoshea. While the forgetting of Torah can be ascribed to the period of Hosea's grandfather Menashe, well, he was a bad guy.
Do you remember him? Do you know who Menashe was?
What page are you on?
On page 12 of the footnote 4.
הוא היה זמן קצר.
Number 4?
Who was King Menashe's father?
Oh, he was the good guy, the one who didn't want to get married because he knew he was going to have a bad son.
That's right, we just read
הוא
his
ניסה
name.
לרצוח.
Chizkiah.
היה משהו.
Chizkiah. I mean, the Hezekiah that we're reading about is the father of King Menashe.
Right.
King Menashe is
Well,
when Chizkiah,
Wicked.
Well, he was very wicked. When Chizkiah was alive, he did everything he could to not have children. And the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, comes to him and says, "Why are you not having children? You have an obligation as a Jewish man. You're a leader of the people. They're looking up to you." He says, "I know the child that I'm going to have is going to destroy the world." He says, "You have to do what you need to do, and let God do what He needs to do." He had prophecy. He's a prophet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he says, in prophecy, I see that my child is going to be a bad person. And what does the prophet tell him? It's not your job. Your job is not to decide, play God. You have children. And then that's already God's problem, what's going to happen then. And he does. He has a child. King Menashe.
He didn't kill somebody, Menashe.
Isaiah.
Menashe becomes he's an evil person, killed a lot of people.
הוא רצח מישהו.
Was it evil?
Yeah, he was one of the more evil kings we ever had.
The child
Meaning,
was
he
evil?
was right. The child come evil.
Wow.
And we attribute much of the
terrible.
period where the Torah was severed from the Jewish people to the rule of King Menashe. He did everything he possibly could to uproot Judaism from the people of Israel.
I'll go and read it.
And this is a terrifying period in Jewish history. You find later that our rabbis have some interesting relationship with him, in which one of the rabbis once mocked Menashe. It's many years after he died. It says, tomorrow we're going to come study about our good friend Menashe. Something like that. Look at that in a derogatory fashion. He spoke about Menashe. It says that night the king Menashe appeared to this rabbi in a dream and tells him, I'm your friend? Who do you think you are? I am one of the greatest scholars Israel ever had. He says, you? He says, you were an idol worshiper. You ran after idols. He said, ran after idols? He said, if you lived in my generation, you would be lifting up your robes so you could run faster than I could after idols. Meaning, King Menashe is saying, I was an evil person, and the circumstances in which I lived made it even more difficult to be righteous than you would have ever had a chance. Don't judge me, because if you lived in my generation, you would have been worse than me. Our rabbis are not saying that Menashe was a jolly good fellow. Rabbis are saying that oftentimes there are things that the generation causes people to be a certain way.
But he inherited the generation from
his righteous father, the most righteous king that ever had.
Right.
But this
so how could the country have been so bad? He promoted education everywhere.
This is a normal thing. It's a normal thing that very good people are replaced, even by their children, who are much more evil than they ever could be.
So
what
how
do you mean
can
by
he
normal?
blame the generation?
What do you mean, normal?
You said it's a normal thing.
It's a common occurrence that you see that the child and a father are not always the same. Sometimes they can be polar opposites from each other. Sometimes you see a world leader that was amazing and their child comes also, the world thinks they're going to be amazing. But greatness doesn't come as an inheritance to people. People work hard for their greatness.
Right.
And we oftentimes make this mistake, thinking that, because they came from a good family, so what?
No.
There are people who come from what you would call a terrible family and they became the greatest people on earth.
But how can he be blaming the generation when he was the one who influenced the generation to be so awful?
Very good. So clearly we never consider him a good person. He's saying that don't be so quick to judge me. You think that we do this a lot. Even we read stories from the Tanakh and how could it be the Jews gave up and built a golden calf and then you're saying this really nice in an air-conditioned room in San Diego. You weren't living in a desert after being enslaved. What they say, before you judge somebody, you should walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you when you judge them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes, right? That's the idea.
Situation is different between the golden calf generation and actually Menashe.
Just like that generation is different from our generation.
Of course.
It's not from
one of the things you sometimes hear. I'm saying this in a transparent way. You sometimes hear children, especially in very Orthodox communities, when you start to read about the Holocaust, and they hear about people that survived the war, came to this country, and weren't observant anymore. And there's a lot of what do you mean they were saved and they weren't? And this attitude is
it's very different.
Let me explain. No. It's not
you
very
see
different.
you live through something
that's
like
right,
that.
That's right. That's exactly what I was saying.
Gosh.
You didn't live through what I lived through to be able to tell me what I should or shouldn't be.
But he grew up in the most lovely and enlightened generation.
And clearly that's not
Why
enough.
are you surprised? Didn't you see a fantastic father that have the worst kids in the world and you don't understand? I don't understand why you're surprised.
I'm not surprised. I'm just saying. I'm saying, how could he be blaming
because
the generation?
that's how he is. That's what he believed.
Who said he's
he
right?
He didn't see
He had the pulpit to speak.
Okay,
And because he had the pulpit to speak, his words got recorded and got passed on,
he could say,
as history.
Yes, I was a bad guy.
You've never met somebody who's blamed their parents. I'm this way because my parents raised me. There are people who blame other people for everything in their life.
Okay.
It doesn't make it right. It just makes it. This is their
was a
justification
Midrash.
for why they're doing what they're doing. My wife always says, if your parents, it's not your fault that your parents made you a certain way, but it's your fault if you stay that way.
Exactly.
You're not a tree. You can move. You can change things in your life. There are people who are always blaming. It's their teachers. It's their wife. It's their husband. It's their ex-wife. The ex-husband. It's everybody else's fault except for taking ownership of my life.
So does Judaism believe basically the soul just comes through the parent and it's?
No.
What does Judaism believe about that?
About what?
You mean the soul comes through the parent?
Yes,
to the child?
Finish your sentence.
No, every embryo has their own soul. Right?
We believe that a person is a product of the people they were born to,
Right.
the environment they were born in,
Right.
But that ultimately all people have the free will to determine who they will be at the end.
But
Some
how do we
people-
feel about a soul coming through?
What do you mean? How do you feel about?
We're born, I believe, with
Yeah.
a soul. I think we kind
We
of come
believe
out
the same.
with a certain kind of,
Correct.
Okay.
I like to laugh, I'm positive, whatever. How does Judaism believe about this
Which
soul?
aspect
You
of the soul?
actually mean not soul. Maybe you mean DNA.
No, your soul.
Genetic.
Some people, we said, are born good.
I'm trying to
some
understand
people
you a
are
little
born.
bit. Right. Okay. You're
So
talking
do you
about like
believe your-
predispositions.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, in Judaism, and there's like many things in Judaism, there's nothing that's black and white. There definitely is a camp in Judaism that believe that people are born with predispositions to certain things.
Right.
It's not the same as like Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther, the Protestant, also talked a lot about people being damned from birth and that they were bad from birth.
Right.
Judaism doesn't believe in that necessarily. We do believe that certain people are born just like you're born with communal or social or financial advantages or disadvantages, depending where you're born, souls are also born not equal. They're born with certain advantages.
Some are more evolved.
Or
Does Judaism
disadvantages.
believe, I mean, I believe that.
Judaism does
And
believe in that.
depending on your soul, you're gonna have to learn certain things.
A lot
or
of
refine
Kabbalistic
things.
methodology believes this a lot. In fact, there's an interesting correlation between your disadvantages and your advantages. For example, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, has an essay, a famous essay, in which he compares the entering of souls into the world as gravity. So, for example, if you were to stand on top of the sand on the Hoya Shores and drop a coin, the coin wouldn't go so deep into the sand. But if you were to stand on top of the lifeguard tower and drop a coin, it would penetrate further. The sixth Lubavitch Rebbe believed that as bad or as low as a person could go in this world, it directly correlates to how high of a soul they actually have. So greater potential means the greater potential for becoming someone bad as well. Which means that people who really don't struggle in life, like they're always struggling between, should I say high with a big smile or high with a medium smile? Those kind of people, sometimes the idea is that they came from a place which was not as lofty. The people who struggle more in life have also greater potential. It doesn't mean they'll reach it, but it means they have potential for
So
greater.
is it pure luck, do you think, in Judaism, if the family, let's say whatever good family is, together, solid,
Right, whatever it is,
they're
right.
not in a right, always has good kids. Is there anything to that, or in Judaism?
Okay, so this is a debate, like everything else. There are Kabbalists who even believe that souls choose the parents they're going to have.
Kabbalists believe that?
There are Kabbalists who are of that opinion. I don't truly understand that opinion, but there is such an opinion that, don't complain about your parents because you chose them, that kind of thing. Like, there is a theory like that. More likely, the approach in the Jewish spiritual circles, as you find in the Talmud, is that parents can really... Listen, the soul comes from the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe gives these two people the ability to create a soul. That soul is therefore infused with whatever energy the people who created it are giving them. Which is why, in books of Kabbalah especially, or spiritual texts especially, there's a lot of, whereas in Catholicism, sexuality is considered a sin or some kind of necessary evil that people have to engage in order to be human beings, the books of Torah are quite to the contrary. A lot of what happens, there's prayer that happens before, there's meditations, and books of Kabbalah, meditation, what happens during intimacy, so on and so forth, because we believe that very often a child can receive a certain advantage, a spiritual advantage, or be infused with certain qualities based on the purity of thought and action that their parents were involved in at the time of conception.
What do you think about children choosing their parents?
Which part of it?
I don't know.
About the
Maybe it's
soul?
reincarnation.
I don't know. Do you believe a soul chooses the parents, or?
I'm not sure that I'm not sure. The idea behind there is that really souls. Okay, again, there's different schools of thought in Judaism, but those who believe that souls are mature spiritual beings before they come into this world will obviously attribute to those souls some kind of choice in terms of what destiny they choose in this world. And there are books of Kabbalah that maybe not in terms of choosing parents, but that every person knows, the soul knows why it's coming to the world and what it needs to accomplish. And really the whole life is a struggle of, can the soul and the body work in tandem to accomplish the things they need to accomplish? Part of that may very well be the parents. Listen, a great chunk of a person's life is spent dealing with their family and their parents, and sometimes that's the person's test. The person's test is the parents they were given, or the siblings they had to deal with, or whatever. And that could very well be a part of that soul's destiny, is what is their relationship with the people around them, and therefore that could be a choice. That choice is they needed to refine something in this world, and that could have been it. But in general, I don't dabble in that sphere, right?
It's a mystery.
There's certain things that I feel like they're above my pay grade.
It's above everybody's pay grade.
Yeah, but I think
But
there are
it's
people,
an
they
interesting
do
concept.
like
They're
to dabble. There are
interesting
people who do
concepts.
like to dabble in this. My wife once taught a class, the elasticity of Jewish halakha, of Jewish law, and I think that very often the Jewish Catholics think that things can't change. What they fail to realize is things that don't change snap, they break. That's like anything else that's rigid in the world. Things that don't have any backbone also are worth nothing. You can't build anything with something that doesn't have any firmness at all. Judaism has a unique balance of the ability to change things within a much larger... There's a Jewish... there's what you may call the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And so long as certain changes still exist within the spirit of the law, they're still very much a part of the Jewish faith. And you could argue who changes things. Is there a formal way to change things? Are the rabbis the only ones that trust to change things? Do the rabbis listen to where the people are at and therefore adjust things accordingly? I'm afraid of words like evolve and progress, and which inevitably make what was look bad, as much as there are things that simply don't apply to the realities which you live in right now. In a very simple level, because this shouldn't be a supercharged issue for anybody. It's actually very juvenile, and for you, some might say, I don't even understand why it's such a big deal. My attitude towards stainless steel in Jewish law is that it cannot become meat or dairy, because stainless steel is a non-absorbent material. And that means that all of those laws that were written regarding metal in Jewish law, and that this is a metal soup pot that is meat, and if you boil water in there, you can't put dairy in that water, all of those things, we believe don't apply anymore. Now, did we change Jewish law? Absolutely not. What changed was the reality to which Jewish law was discussing. Jewish law was speaking about metals. If you go to Point Loma here, to that lighthouse, inside there's a display of knives. You can literally see holes in the metal, kind of like when you see ceramic, unpolished ceramic. It's mechuspas, how do you say?
Rough.
It's like rough. It's porous. It makes sense that if you would cut something with that knife, a steak, there would be some meat still stuck in there. And therefore, when you cut your onion, the onion would have a meat flavor to it. But today, when you cut meat with your stainless steel knife and then you wash it with soap in the sink.
So stainless steel, you can use
well,
this.
Hold on. And you cut an onion with it. My opinion is that onion is not a meat onion. It's simply an onion that you could use with dairy or with meat. It depends on you. When I say something like that to
People
certain
go
groups,
crazy.
they go nuts. See, he's arguing with Jewish law. Jewish law says that See, I specifically chose an example that most of you will not be supercharged about, because it's really a small thing. But this applies in many other areas in Jewish law where we were discussing a reality, kind of like the class I'm giving in LA. There was a time where a Jewish person who chose not to observe Shabbat in public was making a public declaration of, I wish to have nothing to do with my people. That was what that statement meant. And therefore, the reaction of the Jewish community was, you want to have nothing to do with us? We could play that game too. Get out. And we treated, for periods of our history, or at least in legal codes, a person who doesn't observe Shabbat in public, they touch our wine, it becomes idol worship wine. They come to the synagogue, you cannot count them for minyan. Thousands of years ago, not hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, our rabbis already determined, and as we moved into much more modern eras, like Germany before the war, and Morocco before the founding of the State of Israel, and certain other countries where Jews were already involved with the French, or with the Spanish, or with the British, or whatever else was happening, in America, in this country, in the 50s and the 60s, or even the 30s and the 40s, there was a new kind of Jew who didn't observe Shabbat in public, but still came to synagogue, and still did Kiddush, and still had a Passover Seder, and still came on Yom Kippur, and fasted on Yom Kippur. And there are still those in the Jewish community today who will say, oh, they don't keep Shabbat, they're not from us. And then there's an attitude of, it's not that we believe Jewish law has changed. The reality of the world has changed. There are Jews who are very engaged in Jewish life. They're not trying to divorce themselves from the Jewish community, whose levels of observances may vary from other people. But that's not a reason at all in order to treat them as different members of the Jewish community. That's not, some would call that a liberal or progressive or evolved stance of Judaism. I don't view that to be a progression. I view that to be the same rabbis who wrote what they wrote 2,000 years ago would agree with us in 2019. Because they would say the reality to which they were dealing with simply doesn't exist. How many Jews do you know come to synagogue on Friday night and say, I hate the Jewish community? They wouldn't come here if they hated the Jewish community. They wouldn't do Kiddush on Friday night. I don't believe in Shabbat. So why are you doing Kiddush on Friday night? You have to be able to say that Judaism is flexible in terms of what is written doesn't always apply to where you're at. And people are afraid, because when you speak like this, are you Reform? Are you conservative? Are you reconstruct? No, simply a Jewish person who understands Jewish law in the context to which it was given. And it's very hard to find people who are willing, like you heard about the knife. Yeah, the answer is in my house. I'm on camera. Let me turn on the camera. In my house, I'm not afraid. In my house, I will use the same knife for meat and milk as long as I wash them in between. Sue me for it.
And I put it in the ground.
That's
what I learned from my father.
My mother does it too.
No, that's what we learned
but
from our parents.
why did they put it on the ground?
לנקות את זה
Ne'itza
כאילו.
b'karka. You stab. Ever seen this before?
My
A
husband
lot of old
laughed at me.
Ashkenazi grandmothers, they used to have pots full of knives. I used to go to visit people in their house, and they have a pot outside their door full of knives. So the worst thing to leave outside your front door is a pot full of knives. The idea of a rabbi is when you mix a knife with meat and milk, so you should stab it in hard ground 10 times.
24 hours.
Yeah?
No, we leave it for 24
Oh, they leave 24 hours. Okay. Why 24 hours?
I don't know. That's what
I'll
I learned
explain
from
to
my
you.
parents.
After 24 hours, no utensil is meat or milk according to
Okay.
the strict biblical
Okay,
law.
אתה
Because
רואה, יש לו.
flavor, once it spoils, once it 24 hours pass, it spoils. Spoiled meat or spoiled milk is not a kashrut. It's a hygiene problem. It's not a kashrut problem. That's why people wait 24 hours. The stabbing of a knife into the dirt is not some spiritual ritual. You don't have a sponge or
Where do you find
or
dirt
a,
if you live in the concrete city?
okay, that's a really different story. We're talking about a
I
shtetl
have a
somewhere. Yeah?
garden.
You stab a knife in the ground. That's the equivalent of scrubbing something with a sponge. You simply
Right.
didn't have sponges when you lived in a place with no running water.
So stainless steel, it's not observed. It's like glass. I
I'm-
didn't know
Yeah.
that.
I treat stainless steel like glass.
But
my-
how you do it? Because
My rabbi does it,
Okay,
and because we
Okay.
scientifically believe that,
Okay.
that those materials are not porous.
so it's in another word. You don't have to separate stainless steel
That's right.
the meat. And,
But I sometimes I do
But
because my mother would
rabbinically-
stop eating in my house if
Wait,
she would
okay.
know.
But on a rabbinic level.
My mother went to the same school
you
as
have to
Dali.
keep meat and wait, but on a rabbinic level, you keep meat and milk pots separately.
According to what I just said about stainless steel.
Right, you don't have
You
to.
wouldn't
don't
have
have
to.
But
So it's like
Isn't
Wait,
that
hold on.
what
Now,
it's
can
like?
I explain how this works then in other ways? Which is why when people say, so when you go to someone's house that doesn't necessarily observe kashrut, but they cook something for you, for me it's much easier, because it's much easier for me to eat in someone else's house, knowing that most of the utensils that they have are really kosher according to Jewish law.
Okay.
What it accomplishes is so incredibly freeing of an experience for people, and uniting with us. I don't mind that people will be upset at me for having this opinion, but this Pesach I got a letter from a rabbi. I shared it here in the Beit Knesset. A rabbi who for years was told by his teachers he's not allowed to eat in his mother's house for Passover. He's not with a person, got married, he has kids, and he can't go. He goes home Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but for holidays he doesn't go to his mother's house. I got a letter from him and a letter from his mother separately. They didn't know they wrote letters to me. They didn't know the other one wrote a letter to me, thanking me for what they called a healing experience through studying online, or forum online. So for some people that say, Paula wants to know, it's all about kosher questions, you'd be amazed how much kosher sometimes ruins relationships between people.
No, you make my
And
Pesach
when
easier.
I told listen, you can go to your mother's
I'm not
house, just
joking.
ask them when she makes the food for Pesach, she uses her stainless steel pots, and go eat it with your mother. Have chicken soup with your mother, for God's sake.
Are there any, other than cast iron, what other type of pots
Well,
are
cast
there?
iron is a problem. Cast
Cast
iron is
iron's a
really, you
problem.
see that cast
I
iron
don't
can
use
get rusty.
cast iron, but I always used to use
Glass is not a problem. Glazed ceramic, you don't cook in ceramic really. You serve in it, which means it's not hot enough to become kosher or not kosher.
And
So I
Teflon,
stopped
Teflon
putting
wouldn't work.
the
So some people no, it's a good. Why it makes you happy. Some people say Teflon.
My husband
That
said
thin
it's
layer
so
is
nice.
absorbent. The beauty of that thin layer is it's so thin that it can't absorb enough to make a kashrut problem.
good business.
But again, this is why focusing on kashrut can sometimes be a very liberating experience for people who that is what gets in the way of their human relationships with other people.